Hello, my name is Mary Ellen Medallo, and I'm on staff at BU ELOG. I'd like to welcome you to Reimagining Teacher Education, Preparing Educators for a Post-COVID World. Before introducing our moderator, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping remarks. This webinar will be recorded so we can post it on YouTube, and it will be aired locally on BNN networks. The chat will be open for comments throughout the webinar. If you have specific questions, however, if you can enter them in the Q&A box down at the bottom, there's a toggle that will allow us to more readily identify questions. We may address some in the process of the webinar, but we'll allow time at the end for the Q&A at the end of the webinar. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Jalane Tamrat. She is the Dean of Charles Sposato Graduate School of Education, a practice-based master's program for aspiring teachers in the Boston area. Prior to Sposato, Jalane worked for 3 years as the Director of New Teacher Development in Boston Public Schools, where she oversaw induction and licensure for novice teachers. Jalane also served as adjunct at BU ELOG, teaching method courses for TFA core members, as well as graduate level courses in adolescent development. She began her career in education in 2003 as a classroom educator in BPS, teaching course subjects such as science, math, social studies at the middle school level. Jalane holds an EDD from Boston University, an EDM from Harvard University, an MAT from Emmanuel College, and a BA from University of Massachusetts Amherst. Jalane, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the introduction, Mary Ellen. It's my pleasure to be spending this afternoon with you. Thank you to the audience for joining us for today's webinar, Reimagining Teacher Education, Preparing Educators for a Post-COVID World. We've assembled a stellar panel of experts to lead this important and timely conversation on the future of educator prep, and we're very excited to discuss the potential of the current moment to transform the way that we think about and deliver teacher education. It would be an understatement to say that this year has had its share of challenges, from the emergence and ongoing devastation of the COVID-19 pandemic to racialized events that have effectively and painfully peeled back the layers of harm enacted on Black communities through various systems and institutions. 2020 will indeed be one for the ages. But where do we go from here? This question, as simple as it is, begs us to move beyond a state of crisis-induced paralysis or a tendency to just revert back to our old practices and imagine the profound role that teacher education might play in the reconstruction of our schools, education systems, and society. Peter Drucker, widely known as the founder of modern management, once said, "The greatest danger in times of turbulence is not the turbulence, it is to act with yesterday's logic." End quote. The current moment invites us all to reconsider the status quo and project an image of the future that works better for everyone involved. As I set out to assemble the contributing panelists for today's discussion, I felt that it was important to include a diversity of voices who, in addition to being able to lucidly reflect on what has been with regard to teacher preparation, are forward-thinking in their approaches to this topic and would be able to contribute to the conversation from uniquely informed and distinct perspectives. So, without further ado, I'd like to take a moment to introduce these 5 accomplished individuals, and then we'll get right into our discussion. First, we have Ms. Chandra Joseph-Lissette, who has spent the last 26 years working in the field of education. She began her career in higher ed, working in various student affairs departments. After 5 years in higher education, Chandra transitioned to K-12 education and began her teaching career as an elementary school teacher with the Boston Public Schools. In addition to working as an elementary school teacher, Chandra has also worked as a special education teacher, literacy coach, special education coordinator, and assistant principal. Currently, Chandra is a new teacher developer with the Boston Public Schools. In this capacity, Chandra works with teachers and teacher mentors across the district to elevate instructional practices and create highly engaging, student-centered environments focused on strengthening student learning outcomes. Chandra firmly believes that just as every student deserves high-quality teachers, every teacher deserves high-quality coaching and support for continued growth and development. She's especially passionate about coaching and supporting teachers to develop self-care strategies and techniques. Chandra is also the CEO of CJ Education Consulting Group, LLC, and currently is a co-host of Real Talk Real Time with Chandra and Georgette, a weekly virtual event supporting teachers through the complexities of changes in teaching and learning. Chandra holds a BA in academic sociology from Wagner College in Staten Island, New York, a master's degree in student personnel administration and higher education from New York University, and a master's degree in elementary education from UMass Boston. She also holds licenses in elementary education, special education, reading, and has her principal assistant principal admin license. Welcome, Chandra. Dr. Robert Martinell is a lecturer in curriculum and teaching and social studies education at Boston University. His research focuses on reflective teaching, social studies education, and the self-study of teacher education practices. As a doctoral student, he was the recipient of Wheelock's inaugural dissertation research grant in 2015. Prior to his appointment at Boston University, Rob worked as a secondary history teacher, in Boston Public Schools, where he also mentored beginning history teachers as a curriculum coach and supervising practitioner. For many years, he apprenticed Professor Emeritus Philip Tate here at Wheelock, and as an adjunct instructor, taught general and social studies methods courses to undergraduate and graduate education majors. Currently, he teaches Intro to Education and several social studies education courses. Thank you for being with us today, Rob. Suhaidi Palmer is a Boston native who participated in the METCO program as a student. Instead of attending her neighborhood school, she attended school in a predominantly white, wealthy, and high-performing district outside of Boston. This experience gave Suhaidi greater educational access than her neighborhood schools could provide and sparked frustration about the unfair ways that our education system is structured. Suhaidi pursued her teacher education through Teach for America, an alternative certification program where she was drawn by TFA's work with low-income communities like her own and their focus on equity. Suhaidi now serves as the managing director of the TFA Teacher Preparation Program, designing and overseeing the training and development that all Massachusetts core members receive. Glad to have you, Suhaidi. Sandra Sarosia is the manager of educator preparation at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. Sandra and her team at the department work to ensure that educators are ready to meet the needs of all their students from the first day in their licensure role. The team sets and upholds policy regarding the knowledge and skills educators must develop during preparation and is in the process of evaluating and updating these policies to center racial equity and promote anti-racism. Sandra holds degrees in public administration, education and social change, and international studies. Prior to working in Massachusetts, she led the DC branch of Avodah, the Jewish Service Corps, a year-long values-based leadership development fellowship program. She began her career as a kindergarten teacher in Miami, Florida, and then worked to coach and develop early career educators. Welcome to you, Sandra. And last, but certainly not least, we have Jennifer Hedrington, who is in her 16th year of teaching secondary school mathematics and her 11th year of teaching at Malden Public Schools. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Atlantic Union College and a Juris Doctorate from the Massachusetts School of Law. Jen was recently named Massachusetts 2021 Teacher of the Year, which we all know is a huge accomplishment. Jen says that she strives to lead from the back to ensure that those in front succeed. Very glad to have you here, Jen, and thank you again to all of our esteemed panelists. As we mentioned at the beginning of the session, we'll be following a very conversational format today, and while I have specific questions, that I'll be directing at the panelists, I encourage and will at times invite them to respond to the responses of other panelists. And for those of you in the audience who have questions or comments that you'd like to contribute and or have addressed by the panel, please place them in the Q&A. During the discussion, we'll do our best to try to at least address a couple of them. We'll also have a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar, and it's at that time that we'll address more of the audience questions. So my first question is actually for the entire panel, and we'll start with you, Sandra, and then we'll just kind of move down the list. So I'd like for you to reflect for a moment on the current state of ed prep. From your perspective, what do you see as the most pressing issues facing educator preparation programs today?
Thank you so much for having me. It is an honor to be here with this great panel. I think from the state perspective, as we think about some of the most pressing issues facing educator preparation today, we also have to think about the realities of what's happening in classrooms right now as it relates to the hiring decisions that are being made in terms of where new teachers are being placed into schools and classrooms. And so we have a ton of data that shows us that for a very long time now, our least experienced educators tend to be hired and placed into classrooms and classrooms within schools where students have year after year, new teacher after new teacher after new teacher. And the expounded impacts of students growing up through the pre-K-12 system, having folks who are earlier on in their career, and by no fault of their own of being assigned these educators, means that we need to absolutely ensure that the adults that are being put in front of them and working with them throughout their education career are fully ready for that day one of responsibility that they have in the role. So I think one of the pressing issues as it comes to that is the need for enough practice and feedback throughout a preparation experience so that regardless of the classroom you're placed in, if it's that student's first time having a first-year educator or if they have the Massachusetts Teacher of the Year who's demonstrated their expertise for many years on end, that individual is ready to meet those students' needs. So really just thinking about what that experience is in their preparation program to make sure that they're ready. But that gets us a little bit again to like who is coming into the classrooms. Another big data point that we often look at, or we've been looking at in recent years, is around the racial background of folks who are in the classroom. So in Massachusetts, 92% of our educators are white. That does not match up with the student population that we have that is getting increasingly diverse, with Latinos being the fastest growing demographic in Massachusetts. And we know that that students need windows and mirrors into their educational experience, and having a teacher demographic that is not representative of our student demographic has a ton of impact on what students are learning. It's not, again, just about the who is in that position, but what are they thinking about? How are they approaching their work? What is the background and experience that they are bringing into these conversations with their students? So we need more diverse educators, teachers, leaders, folks in ed prep who are preparing those future teachers and leaders and at the department as well. We believe that diversifying the educator workforce will help to disrupt patterns of historical inequity that need to be disrupted. There are a variety of different ways that we at the department are thinking about that. I'm sure that will come up as well. But I think in terms of the role that educator preparation has to play in this, they're in kind of the middle sometimes, because it's about who is coming into your program, who is wanting to become an educator, and then who is going into their districts. And oftentimes there's not always a match between, again, who's coming in and then the kind of work that you are doing with your teachers, and then they're going to schools or districts that are perhaps not also creating the kinds of conditions that lead to retention and a desire to want to continue and stay in the education system. And so I think educator preparation plays a unique role of thinking really intentionally, not just again about the who, but the what it is that they're talking about, why it is that they're bringing folks together, and how they are working together with them.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Same question for you, Rob. What do you see as the most pressing issue facing you in your work as an educator preparer?
Well, first of all, again, thank you for having me. This is it's an honor to be among such awesome educators and to be a part of this discussion. I think echoing something that Sandra brought up, one issue, and it's certainly, I think it's not a new issue, but I'd certainly say that at least in in our school and in many schools of ed, I still think trying to attract more teachers of color to schools of education is a huge issue, but that also brings up the question of how are we making schools of education more accessible to prospective teachers of color. It's one thing to want a more diversified teaching workforce and a more non-white teaching workforce, but we also have to ask the tough questions of how we are making our institutions actually accessible to everyone. So that I think is a big issue facing educator prep. Forgive me, I'm sure we probably have election fatigue, but I'm a social studies person. And so the election and the results of this last election are very much still fresh in my mind. And so when I look at the most recent presidential election results and just general trends with the electorate over the last 4 years, I see not overwhelmingly, but I do see a large portion of the electorate that has a tough time discerning the difference between the credibility of a Reddit message board versus the credibility of a reputable newspaper. And so I do think that is a very pressing issue for all teachers, but especially those who prepare teachers. And how do we prepare teachers who are going to end up teaching a lot of students who have really trouble discerning those two things, especially in an age where they have unprecedented access to information. So that is a huge challenge, I think, weighing on my mind as a teacher educator. And I think in light of COVID, and I'm not in the business of making predictions, but I think even in a post-COVID world, God willing that we see that, I don't think hybrid learning and teaching is going anywhere. And so I think what that's doing for us is it's changing the definition of what pedagogy is, right? And it really has to help us reflect on, well, what does it mean to prepare teachers to teach in an environment that is partly online, that is partly in person? As I'm sure everyone else on this panel can attest, like we're still wrapping our head around it. Like as I'm trying to juggle the students who are online and juggle the students who are in front of me, while also making sure that everyone who can't attend has actually access to the technology needed to. So I think I don't have the answer to that question, but that is certainly a pressing question on my mind as I think about what it means to prepare teachers for the field right now.
Thanks, Rob. Now to you, Suhaili. What do you see as the most pressing issues facing educator preparation programs today?
Thank you. A lot of what Sandra and Rob shared really resonated with me, particularly as it relates to the diversity of our teaching body. I think right now what feels top of mind for me is how we're preparing teachers to meet a lot of the trauma and social emotional concerns that our students are facing, both in the face of COVID, but also the amount of racial injustices that have been in part of their entire life, but have really, like Rob said, been central to and have so much access to seeing that. And how are we preparing teachers to really support students in developing the skills to manage that? And how are we thinking about the role that plays in education is the thing that I'm thinking about. I think additionally, really thinking about what does it mean to think holistically about education when we don't know what that's going to look like. I think so many of our best practices are contained in four walls, and that just needs to change, and access and materials and authentic practice, all of those things just need to look so different, and we don't have a blueprint for that right now. And so I think trying to both support my current teachers and think ahead of what are the best practices that can actually be applied to a hybrid setting.
Great. And Jennifer, I'm going to ask you from the vantage point of someone working in a school and not necessarily kind of as a teacher educator, what are some of the more pressing issues that you're seeing on the ground in your work environment?
I think that it's a matter of a relationship with our students, right? So assuming you're a teacher, I'm going to assume that you know the content, right? So I'm going to give you that. So how do we get the kids to be engaged, and how do we show them that we're there for them? And I think it's a matter of a relationship. And I know Rob has said that we need more teachers of color, and that's going to take time. we've been saying that for years. So I really believe that it's a matter of, with the teachers that we have now, it's a matter of learning how to teach in color, right? So I may not be a teacher of color, but I can teach in color. And to use what we have now and just change the mindset, right, to match the children. So I may not physically look like the child, but I can begin to understand and appreciate and learn from that child, and then that can drive my teaching, right? And I think that so I did not go through one of the traditional ed prep programs, right? I was thrown into teaching, so I learned on the fly. And going through all the the PDs and all that, a PD that was not presented was one of relationships, and that has been my strength, right? So I think that moving forward, when people do come into the profession, it would be a benefit to talk about how to teach in color and how to see your students for who they are. And when I mean color, I just don't mean being black and white or what defines me, right? I'm Haitian, right? So that's I'm a woman, I'm Black, I'm a mother, you know, and for many of my kids, there's a lot of trauma. Like, so I'm a rape victim, right? And that colors me. That I see life through that. So when we say to teach in color, I just encourage that we allow the new teachers to understand that it is not just about the ABCs, but it's about what makes that child. And there's so much that makes that child that you cannot find in a textbook.
Great points. All right, so Chandra, in your position, you both work in schools with new teachers. You also have the experience of being a classroom teacher, and you've also worked on the teacher development side. What do you see? And you can choose to either reflect on what's happening in classrooms, or like Jennifer did, or maybe kind of coming from a teacher, educator, ed prep perspective. Like, what do you see as the most pressing issues facing either ed prep or teachers in general today?
So thank you, Jalane. I think what's really pressing on teachers when I'm working with new teachers is they're completely overwhelmed, right? And that's nothing new for new teachers, but I think what's happening now is that they're completely overwhelmed because they haven't been prepared for just the vast differences from classroom to classroom, from school to school, even from district to district. I think in general that folks kind of prepare kind of flatly all teachers from one particular perspective. So we're all going to take the methods math course that we need to take. We're all going to take, classroom management. But the reality is that classroom management in X school and classroom management in Y school are very different, right? And so in my ideal brain, I really think about tracks for teachers, right? So if teachers are interested in teaching in urban environments, here's what we're talking about. If teachers specifically are interested in teaching in BPS, here's a set of courses that you could actually take that actually match what you need to be prepared for that particular district. Because when you come in and you've been trained in one particular way that's kind of flat, you get overwhelmed. You get overwhelmed by the vast amount of work that you need to do. You get overwhelmed by the lack of resources because you're actually shocked when you walk into some buildings and yes, there are still blackboards, right? But you've been going through a teacher ed program with all of this technology. And even right now, today, in the middle of COVID, when there's so much technology going on, everybody is learning, over technology, many of our students still aren't. So what does that mean? So what do I then do as a new teacher if I haven't been prepared for that? So I really think that, we all need to prepare our teachers for what the real world actually is. The theory is important and it's great and they need it. Don't get me wrong. They need their content, absolutely. And here's the reality. So I would ideally love to see more teachers out in the field earlier. I want you to do more observations earlier. What does it look like in real time, real life? And spend more time in those spaces, in those places, right? Before they begin to do, their student teaching. I mean, during their pre-pracs, but go into varied settings. Like, don't just go into the same schools that your ed prep program has been sending you to for the last 15 years, right? Like, let's shake it up. Let's see something different. Because that's where the real learning is going to happen. And that's the kind of flexibility, that's the kind of broad kind of outlook that teachers are going to need to teach moving forward.
Great. So Chandra, if we could just stick with you for a second. I'm assuming that your ed prep program, or the program that you went through to become an educator, was one that didn't differentiate tracks for people based on the type of school environment they were planning to teach in. I'm curious to know, like, a little bit more about your own ed prep experience. How did you come to be a teacher? And can you give us a specific example of an experience in your preparation that you wished had been done differently? And if you could do it all over again, what would you want to change?
Awesome. So I was a career changer, so not traditional. I actually started off in higher education, student personnel administration in higher education, mostly because I wanted to be a college student forever. So I decided that was a great way to do it. And interestingly enough, I started off at BU. I was actually a resident director in Warren Towers for a couple of years. And after BU, I actually went to work in student affairs at Bristol Community College down in Fall River. And it was there that I realized how many students were so ill prepared for college. And so in working with so many of the college students there that were taking all of these remedial courses that they were paying big money for, but were not going to count towards their degrees, I was annoyed, to say the least, about what does that mean about the education that they had received K to 12 that said that they were prepared and pushed them forward without them being prepared. And so that's where I really began to think about, well, what am I going to do about this? And I thought about where I actually gained my foundational skills and what I needed to be prepared. And for me, I had basically what I needed in elementary education, and then it was just more, right? And so from there, I went back. I went to a traditional teacher training program, which I will say was really good in it being practical, right? So most of my instructors were actually still teachers. So that was very, 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 very helpful to me. What it didn't help me with was choosing, I think, my pre-practicum and practicum experiences that matched what I actually wanted to do. So they pretty much had, these are the sets of schools that you can choose from. Well, what do you know? You go, okay, I'll choose that one, right? But if you're thinking about working in a particular environment, for me, I always wanted to work in an urban environment, always wanted to work in the Boston public school systems, that sort of thing. And I did get to do my practicum in a fairly diverse school. It was not in Boston, needless to say. And it was a very, very, very different experience from when I actually got into the classroom. So I actually wish that schools of ed would be far more flexible, one, in allowing folks to choose schools that match pretty much, most people kind of know the school environments they want to work in that pretty much match those environments. I think they need to be a little bit more flexible about that. And if people don't know, then I think that schools of ed need to work with pre-service teachers to kind of figure out and match, because it is really, really important that who you are and what you want to do matches the environment in which you teach. You can be an amazing teacher, but you might not be amazing for this school. You might actually be amazing for that school, right? And I think we need to take far more time to think about that. And we don't. We train our teachers, we send them out to the schools that we've traditionally sent them out to, and then we say, find a job. That's the first, anywhere, just make sure you get a job. Well, not good. Someone who actually supports new teachers, I can't tell you how more often than not, folks are put into really, really bad situations for new teachers. They shouldn't either be in that school or they shouldn't be in that particular role. Let them gain some experience a few years in, and then maybe they'll be appropriate for X, Y, and Z. Also, in my ideal world, no new teacher ever teaches alone. That's my fantasy. It's going to stay there, but I think that we should work towards it.
Great. Let's switch gears for a moment. Sandra, at the state level, you have the bird's eye perspective on what's happening with regard to ed prep across the state. You also have a finger on the pulse of change initiatives that impact ed prep programs. From your vantage point, how has ed prep changed in the last 5 to 10 years, and what do you predict will happen in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so one thing that we've been really trying to do for the last 5 to 10 years is to be increasingly descriptive of the expectations that we have while not being prescriptive of the approach. And I think that hits on some of what we've heard in terms of the need for different programs to be innovative and flexible to meet the needs of the people who are coming into their programs. Because in the same ways that not all individuals want to be teaching in the same kinds of schools and classrooms, I think different types of programs are drawing different folks with different backgrounds in terms of what it is that they're trying to do. And yet in Massachusetts, a license at the end of it, if it's a traditional route, if it's an alternative route, whatever route you're going through, that license is still enabling you to have responsibility of any of the kids for which you are hired to teach. And so how do we make sure that with whatever we're setting, we're being incredibly descriptive of what it is that we expect you to do, but leave that space for innovation and flexibility, and some that are really digging deeply into STEM work, some that are thinking about performance-based approaches to the learning that's happening. Some are some more in a traditional component, and right, like that theory versus practice, we're really trying to be more explicit about the expectations around practice, because that is absolutely vital. But where does that practice look? You know, that can be a little bit different. One example of this is emphasizing a need to be responsive to pre-K-12 school and district needs. Ed prep programs should not be existing in a vacuum and in a silo of here's what we're doing and then kind of pushing you out to go figure out the world, but rather say, who are the partners that we're working with? What are the needs that they have? And I think in our ideal world, that symbiotic relationship between schools and districts and the preparation programs is really one that is robust, so that me as a teacher candidate who's coming in, I'm understanding, are you preparing for urban settings? Are you preparing for rural settings? Are you preparing for this kind of context or that one? And who are your strong partnerships that you have? Now let me, in my pre-practicum, experience a variety of different settings, but also make sure that in the practicum experience I'm getting, hopefully I'm positioning myself to be a good person that you might want to hire afterwards. The amount of time and energy that goes into the training of new hires is extensive. And if schools and districts could get more strategic around all of the practicum placements that they have and seeing who of these individuals have already started to get that onboarding through that practicum experience to then transition more smoothly. So that's one example of some of the descriptions that were the expectations we're trying to get more descriptive around. And we've seen increased kind of consistency in the expectations across organizations. About 10 years ago, our data was showing us that there was more, we were seeing more differences within one organization across the different programs than we were seeing across organizations. We've got about 70 preparation programs in Massachusetts, about 6,000 completers every year. And we assumed that like maybe this school is doing a great job and this one not so much, but rather we saw within this school of their 20 programs, some were really strong and robust and others were struggling. So we tried to elevate the expectations at the organization level, focus on continuous improvement. There have to be systems in place for organizations to be continuously monitoring, not just what they're doing, but what's the impact of what we're doing? How do we know that what we're doing is working for our teachers and for their students? And not just thinking about once they graduate my school and leave, but now they've graduated, they've left, they were hired, now what? How are they doing? How are those students feeling about them? How are the principals who hired them feeling about the readiness of those individuals? So again, I think we were pushing on a mindset shift around that day one readiness. There still is a sense of you can't possibly ever be ready just because of the depth of complexity of teaching and all that it entails. And we certainly get that, but we also don't think that it's okay to say, well, you'll figure it out. Well, you'll learn on the job, because that's just not doing justice for our kids. So we've seen a shift in that mindset. We've seen a greater impact on students. So as a state, again, we're tracking the data. We're one of the few states that has a connection between and again, it is not perfect and what we're measuring is not perfect. So we're talking about that. But if we look at SGP, student growth percentiles of students with new teachers, if we look at eval data of new teachers, those are all increasing across the state in the past 10 years. And we do think that a lot of that is because of this tightening up of some of those expectations of programs while still allowing for the flexibility. I think the other piece that's kind of important as we think about is that we did really take a rising tide lifts all boats model, right? We said, okay, here's what we're going for. Let's set these expectations and hope to see improvements. And I think we did see those. I think as we continue to look forward, we are building on that strong foundation that that our programs have been working on, right? We've been partnering with them, but programs are the ones doing the hard work every day of working with candidates. We've seen the improvements, but we know that the reality for our Black and Brown students in Massachusetts is still not what it needs to be. And we believe that that rising tide lifts all boats notion has been overall net positive and also not uniquely targeting the needs of the students here in Massachusetts, of our English learners, of our students with special needs. And so as we move forward, we're going to continue digging into a few of these things, centering things in anti-racist practices. We believe that if that is the starting point, it will be beneficial to all students. If we think about what are the needs, when thinking about meeting the trauma of all students, and what does that look like, and how are teachers thinking about that? The importance of building relationships. Content does not matter if the experience of students in classrooms is not one that is conducive to them being able to be engaged in doing the work that they're doing. Literacy, our literacy rates are not where they need to be at all. And there is evidence-based practices that exist that show that if students get access to literacy in these ways, they can learn to read, and reading is such a core component of accessing the world around them and having the freedom and the liberatory education that we want to push for. So as we move forward in Ed Prep, I think, again, there's been a ton of work over the last 10 years in particular, I think, to focus on these areas. Some organizations, again, are far ahead of us and they're bringing us along in what it is that they're doing. For others, it's been a little bit more work together in partnership to try and shift a big boat that has been doing the same thing for a very long time. In some ways, the impact is not showing us that that is successful. And I think as we continue to center anti-racism and upholding that in terms of what does it mean to be day one ready, you're not ready if you're not disrupting racism, is something that I would hope that in 10 years from now, 5 years from now, if we're having this conversation, we could point to a lot of evidence that's showing that we've made advancements in that side as well.
Great, thank you, Sandra. I want to address one of the questions in the chat. Jennifer Miller has a question relating to our new kind of modality of working with students and, and even within our Ed Prep programs, like everything is online. So I want to ask you a question, Jen. With the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've witnessed a huge shift from in-person to remote instruction that's been enabled by technological advancements in education. What are you noticing, and what do you think Ed Prep programs should be aware of as they prepare teachers for new technological realities on the ground?
So I am one of those who definitely struggles with technology. So this has been a major shift for me. I would encourage, to introduce all, different avenues, different platforms when it comes to technology. But for a new teacher, find what works best for you. And then with that, manipulate it, right? So for me, I just learned how to use Google Slides, right? But with that one platform, what I've been doing is, finding ways to give my students options inside of that one platform for me, right? And I think that it is overwhelming as a new teacher when, first I got to get to know the kids, and I was trained to be in the four walls, and now you're telling me I have to do this where I can't see the children because a lot of them don't turn their cameras on, right? The interaction is different, and then you're asking me to do all this technology. So I would definitely encourage these programs to push that new teachers incorporate choice into what the student is able to do within that technology, right? Because we all know that one shoe does not fit all. So encouraging them to find different ways to speak to the children so that they can understand the information. This pandemic has definitely opened up a lot of doors for me as far as how to get to know the kids. I'm using Snapchat, right? I just had a parent contact me last night. I'm like, why not use email? But hey, that's because, again, we're taught that if you want to reach a teacher, you use an email, right? But she messaged me on Snapchat. We have kids who like the video calls versus let me set up a meeting, right? So I think it's just a matter of allowing the new teachers to know that what was is no more, and what you thought was inappropriate, right? I use that word, is now appropriate, right? Like it is okay if a student reaches out to you via Snapchat, or if they want to get help. Like I have kids who are like, Miss, it's 7 o'clock, but I need help. So you need to get back on Zoom, on Google Meets. And so yesterday I had an hour from 7 to 8, taught a kid one-on-one. But because of the learning environment, it worked for her. So I think as new teachers, we have to understand that, again, like the traditional may not and most likely will not work. So we have to think outside of the box. You have to create your own box.
Right. And I think, you mentioning Snapchat and me wondering how long Snapchat will be the it technology, how long before it's abandoned for something else. It seems like it's maybe more important for, if we're instilling teachers or, pre-service teachers, we're instilling in them the capacity to be able to engage with new technologies. We also have to instill in them the mindsets that, they are going to have to be lifelong learners with regard to technologies, and always make sure to evolve with the times. Rob and Suhadi, and I'm just being mindful of the time, it's slipping away. So I want to just ask everyone to try your best to be as concise as possible in your responses, and maybe only take a minute or two to respond to the questions going forward. But Rob and Suhadi, either one of you can take this, or both. I'm actually interested in hearing from both of you. Can you reflect on how the technological shifts that we just discussed have impacted your own ed prep programs? What are you doing differently in your programs today that you didn't do last year, and what puzzles remain? Rob, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, so, I guess I'd always like to say that I pride myself on being a flexible teacher, but I think this shift to more online learning has certainly, I think, rightfully brought it to the forefront, just given the fact that I have so many students who are taking classes in different time zones, that I need to be more accommodating for, that really, quite frankly, cannot be up to be a part of the class. And so it's really forced me to really, think outside the box, as Jennifer was talking about, and thinking like, okay, like, well, what new accommodations can I make? But also, there is a charge that is often levied upon schools of education, and that we often don't practice what we preach. And in many, many cases, that charge is warranted. And so I think as a teacher educator, I'm always consumed with, well, am I actually practicing the pedagogy that I want my teachers to promote? And I think that same mindset is now applying to the type of teacher I am in the hybrid environment. Am I being the flexible teacher that I hope my teachers will be once they're in the field, when they're, using all of this? Am I modeling that flexibility with that? Am I using this platform to its advantage and being innovative in ways, even as we're all very, very new to this. So I'm still learning, of course, of how to leverage this new medium. But I think that's definitely something that's certainly on my mind more as a teacher educator now, is that, like, what is good pedagogy in this new environment? And am I actually modeling it in a way that I hope that my prospective teachers will down the road?
Thank you so much, Rob. Suhadi, I'm actually going to invite you to answer this question, but from a slightly different angle. This is actually a question from the chat. Reggie John is asking, should schools of ed adjust their curriculum in order to help students learn remotely better? What's your experience been with this at TFA? Have you had to make any adjustments to your curriculum?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we have adjusted a lot. Our teacher market core members are in the classroom as we continue to train them, and we've been thinking a lot about how do we, like Rob said, model the pedagogy that we want. And so it has looked different. We used to have a set arc of learning that happened. We had these like Saturday PDs. They went every quarter. They had these long PDs, and it was set, and then they had coaching in between. And now thinking a lot about, like, yes, there's an arc of learning, and what are some ways that we can have more opportunities for them to have menu of choices based on different domain areas that they need additional support in, recognizing that like remote and hybrid learning is a new domain area. Like they still need all the domains we were hitting, but now they need different versions of that. But to Chandra's point, it's different based on school settings. Some of our schools are doing only remote, some are doing hybrid, some are doing like live teaching, some are doing mostly asynchronous. And so I've been trying to think about like, what does it look like to have, in addition to our PD days, like right now that we're going through this fall support, there's like 4 weeks of sessions in 4 domain areas, and they have to like set a learning plan for this 4 weeks, and then they take sessions according to that, hoping that both it meets like the unique needs in addition to the domains, but also that it models that for students, when you're setting asynchronous work, it should also be targeted in key domains. You should be having a structure for them to reflect on how they're developing during that time. And so thinking critically about those things. And so, yeah, our curriculum is changing. We're adding more domains, but also thinking about how do we help teachers have agency in additional choice, in addition to the set domains that we had already discussed.
And Suhedi, I'm going to ask you another question. And this one also deals with, one of the, what I would say are like 2 of the main areas of like focus, or like things that have moved, I think, a lot of us in education to shift our practices. And that is the issue of systemic racism and the spotlight that's put on it recently. So with the murder of George Floyd earlier this year and the subsequent uprising for justice, as they've spotlighted systemic racism that persists in many of our institutions, including schools, I'm wondering if you can share how an increased focus on issues of race in a national discourse has impacted teaching and learning at TFA. And I'm actually going to, like, before you start, Suhedi, I'm going to ask the same question of Rob, because you're also in teacher education, but you're coming from a more traditional higher ed perspective. And Jen, I'm going to ask you as well, because I'd love to know what's happening on the ground. Okay.
Thinking about racism was always a part of our programming, right? Like educational inequity is grounded in systemic racism. And so identity development had always been a part of our programming. And then how does that impact the way that you are being responsive in the classroom? What has changed is like, it's not actually just in the classroom, right? Like when we look back, like the systems of oppression that are happening in schools are at the school level, at the state level, at the country level, the world, right? And so thinking about how do we not stop at identity development, don't stop at like how to be inclusive. You have to push to how are we building tools to have you reflect on equity through your curriculum, the structure you're setting up in your classroom, the language you use, and then creating practices related to that. And so that's been the big shift. And then because so many of our schools, like our teachers are placed at set partner schools, thinking about what supports do principals and school-based coaches need, what tools are we using with our teachers in training that we can also have them use at schools to make sure that it's not just our individual core member in their classroom, because that's not how change happens. Change happens at the school level, right? And so how does that teacher also relate to the teacher that's next door that's now using the same tool, who's a veteran who like has been doing this for longer? And so I think that's some of the ways that we're thinking about it. It's not just inclusive language, not just like making sure that there are diverse perspectives in your text. It's beyond that. It's like, actually, how do you think about what parts of history you're covering or not? What voices are being brought up in your content? Like, what is anti-racist about your pedagogy or not? And so trying to think more holistically and at the school level are some of the big shifts.
Okay. Rob, how about from your vantage point?
So from my vantage point, I think one thing that I've noticed is a desire amongst our student body for anti-racist teacher education. I see an increased desire amongst our students, especially our white students, who are, I think, holding us more accountable for doing this work. But at the same time, I also think too, like, I'd be remiss not to say that while this is a positive development, I also think it warrants reflection for all white people, white teachers and white teacher educators, to wonder why now? Where was this interest years ago? And that's something that they need to reflect on. Because, I've even heard, and this is anecdotal, whether murmurings from students or colleagues that, in in a post George Floyd world, we must do this work, which is very problematic, presumes as if this is a new phenomenon of sorts. So I think while I'm really encouraged by this development and this desire for a lot of students, particularly white students, to want to engage in this work, it can't be without the accountability of wondering why wasn't I wanting to do this work earlier? So I think that's just something that's been on my mind as both a teacher educator, as a white teacher educator, and as a teacher educator of prospective white teachers. So again, positive, change in what I'm seeing and a lot of the shifts I'm seeing in both my pedagogy and the pedagogy of, I think, our school as a whole. But that's definitely, like, from my vantage point, kind of like what I'm seeing.
And Jen, in like a minute or less, if you can.
Yes, definitely. So I think the conversation is something that's being had in classrooms with the kids because they do want to talk, right? Unlike adults, they're willing to have this conversation. They're braver than we are. What I think needs to come out of this is you're asking people to have conversations about something they've never had to talk about. It's like you asking me to teach, physics. I don't know. So you should not leave me in charge of teaching young minds physics, right? So we're asking these adults to have a race-based conversation to educate children so that they don't repeat our mistakes. Yet these individuals themselves have not had to have this conversation. So they're not comfortable, and these kids aren't dumb, right? They can read right through us. And for many children of color, they know more than the teacher, right? They live in color, they live this experience. So it's almost insulting to have someone try to talk to me, try to teach me when you yourself do not know or understand or appreciate my reality. So I think that the conversation, and it's happening. I know in my school, my principal is really pushing it, but I think on the school level, before we have this learning moment with the students, we ourselves need to understand what is going on, and we need to figure out how to speak to the children, right, about this, and to get to so I guess we need to learn before we teach.
Yes.
That makes any sense.
Thank you so much. We have a question from an anonymous attendee, and that actually aligns with a question that I want to ask you, Chandra. So Chandra, even in pre-pandemic times, teaching has been widely regarded as one of the most emotionally taxing professions. And I know this to be true from experience. I know that in addition to your work as a new teacher developer, you do consulting work that promotes teacher self-care as a necessary, though overlooked practice that can ensure greater longevity in the profession. What are your recommendations for leaders of ed prep programs to drive this message home?
First and foremost, let's remember that teachers are people too. Let's just start there. There's lots of talk, and there always is and should be emphasis on kids and on families, but teachers are people too, with kids and families and friends and all of that goes with it. And so we have to remember that. And I don't know what's going on in teacher ed now. I know that in my preparation, that was not a consideration at all, right? Like, you just kind of forged through it. So we have to remember that, and we have to grant pre-service teachers the permission to be human and act human. And we have to also provide them with spaces and places where they can be vulnerable, where they can be stressed out, and they can also be supported to the next level of pushing through. We have to erase this whole idea of perfectionism, because I'm telling you, it is a killer of early career teachers. It is a killer. We are humans. We make mistakes, right? We learn from our mistakes because we also are forever learners, and then we move forward and we get better at what we're doing, right? But there's no expectation that you should be perfect. And they should also model that for their students, right? We make mistakes, we learn, we get up and we move on. And I'm not saying that we should lower our expectations at all, right? But I am saying that we need to teach new teachers how to manage their expectations, right? Which I think is really critical, and we haven't done such a great job of at all. I think that we need to add teacher ed programs need to add teacher self-care courses. It needs to be a thing that you're teaching. It really does. Like, and not just a strategy here and there, but an actual course to help them be able to manage their expectations and manage all of the competing, right, demands that they have in school and at home. There are strategies and it can be done, but we actually have to show that we value it. And we show that we actually value it by talking about it, by creating spaces, by making courses, and by creating communities within our pre-service programs where teachers can actually talk and work through all of this right alongside when they're learning their methods courses, when they're learning everything else they're learning. We make it real for them and encourage them to talk with their family, their friends, their support system about what they're going through. If they can begin to do that in pre-service spaces, then hopefully they will also begin to do that in spaces when they walk into schools as teachers, because it does mean that you're going to need some help. So we need to be able to reach out to the people that we need help from. And finally, teaching is not a solo act. So as a self-care experience, pre-service teachers need to understand that they need to find their tribe. They need to reach out to mentors and coaches and get the support that they need. And that needs to be okay. We need to tell them that's okay. You're not expected to do this alone. There's a whole supportive community to help you do this. The village is not just for the children. The village is for the teachers as well.
All right. Well, I think that that is probably as good of a place as any to conclude today's conversation. I want to thank everyone on our panel, as well as our host, Boston University Wheelock School of Education and Human Development, for your time today, for the platform. I want to thank all of our participants and audience members. I think there were so many good things that came out of this conversation, and I actually wish we had more time to dig into them, as well as answer more of the questions in our Q&A. But again, thank you all for attending, and in your own communities, I hope that you continue the conversation that we've started today. Thanks, everyone.